So chapter 18, right? So we've read the boys are still relentlessly, meaning they're not giving up. They're still relentlessly trying to dig this hole, this big hole. All of their smaller holes are now connected. So they're digging in this big hole, trying to find something else that the warden wants. So the gold tube that Stanley found in his hole, that the warden thinks X-ray found in his hole the next day. But this gold tube, open on one end, closed on the other, has the initials KB on it. This gold tube is definitely interesting to the warden. It has brought her out of her cabin by the 2 oak trees and has her in the desert every day with the boys watching them dig. Now she is starting to lose her patience. She's not coming as early in the morning and she's leaving sooner than she used to. But she's making the boys dig extra. She's intent on finding something. And it's causing the boys' tempers to become maybe not so much. So maybe a little quicker to get in a fight with one another, as we saw by Armpit's behavior after he hit Stanley with the shovel. Here we go. Chapter 18. The next morning, Mr. Sir marched the boys to another section of the lake, and each boy dug his own hole, 5 feet deep and 5 feet wide. So, at least for the moment, it seems like the warden has told them to go look elsewhere. At least now, he knew just how much he had to dig for the day. He was glad to be away from the big hole. And it was a relief not to have other shovels swinging past his face, or the warden hanging around. So the warden's not coming today. He dug his shovel into the dirt, then slowly turned to dump it into a pile. He had made his turns smooth and slow. If he jerked too quickly, he felt a throbbing pain just above his neck where Zigzag's shovel had hit him. So it wasn't Armpit's shovel, it was Zigzag's. That part of his head, between his neck and his ear, was considerably swollen. So he's got a knot here on between his neck and his ear. There were no mirrors in camp, but he imagined he looked like a hard-boiled egg, like he had a hard-boiled egg sticking out of him. So he just compared the lump on his neck right here to a hard-boiled egg, using the word like. What example would that be? Simile, good job. The remainder of his body hardly hurt at all. His muscles had strengthened. That's one way he's changed. His hands were tough and calloused. That's the second way he's changed. He was still the slowest digger, but not all that much slower than Magnet. Less than 30 minutes after Magnet returned to camp, Stanley spat in his hole. After his shower, he put his dirty clothes in his crate and got out his box of stationery. He went in the tent to write his letter so Squid and the other boys wouldn't make fun of him for writing to his mother. Dear Mom and Dad. Again, this is a letter, so they've put it as smaller text. They've moved it further in on the page, and it's in italics. So it makes it stand out. It's easy for me, the reader, for you, the reader, to see that that's a different part of the chapter. Dear Mom and Dad, camp is hard, but challenging. Definitely true, right? We've been running obstacle courses and have to swim long distances on the lake. And that part's not true, is it? Tomorrow we learn. He stopped writing as Zero walked into the tent, then returned to his letter. He didn't care what Zero thought. Zero was nobody. It's funny to me that Stanley is so willing to think that Zero is nothing, when Stanley himself was bullied and picked on and treated as a nothing in school. kind of sad for me to see him act that way. However, maybe it's that he doesn't feel threatened by Zero. Maybe that's why he thinks he's nothing. Tomorrow we learn to rock climb. I know that sounds scary, but don't worry. So he's continuing to really feed his mom a really stretched out truth of what camp is doing. Zero was standing beside him now, watching him write. Stanley turned and felt his neck throb. I don't like it when you read over my shoulder, okay? Zero said nothing. I'll be careful. It's not all fun and games here, but I think I'm getting a lot out of it. It builds character. Well, that part's true. Digging holes is supposed to build character for the boys, make them better boys. The other boys, I don't know how, said Zero. What? Can you teach me? Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Teach you what? To rock climb? Zero stared at him with penetrating eyes. Penetrating, there's that vocabulary word. Did you catch it? It means Stanley now is staring and glaring at him. She's like, what do you want me to teach you? What are you talking about? Zero stared at him with penetrating eyes. So Zero staring at him. What? Said Stanley. He was hot and tired and sore. I want to learn to read and write, said Zero. Stanley let out a short laugh. He wasn't laughing at Zero. He was just surprised. All this time he had thought Zero was reading over his shoulder. But if he can't read, was he reading over his shoulder? Not at all. Sorry, he said. I don't know how to teach. So remember that question where I asked you if you would be willing to teach someone to learn to read and write? Stanley has to make that decision now. Stanley has to decide if he's willing to teach Zero how to read and write. Stanley says, I'm not a teacher. After digging all day, he didn't have the strength to try to teach Zero to read and write. He needed to save his energy for the people who counted. So he's saying that Zero doesn't matter. You don't have to teach me to write, said Zero. Just to read. I don't have anybody to write to. Sorry, said Stanley again. Man, Zero really is all alone. He doesn't even have anybody to write a letter home to the way Stanley is doing to his mom. Kind of makes me feel bad for Zero. Doesn't it you? I mean, Mr. Pendanski kind of picks on him all the time, saying there's nothing in his head. The boys clearly think that on the food chain, Zero is at the bottom. They've even moved Stanley up to be in front of Zero when they line up for the water. And now Zero's saying he can't read and he doesn't need to write because he doesn't have anybody to write to. Kind of makes me sad for him. Stanley thinks. His muscles and hands weren't the only parts of his body that had toughened over the past several weeks. His heart had hardened as well. So, if your heart is hardened, does that really mean that inside your chest, the muscle that is your heart is hard? Right? It doesn't. What does it mean if you have a hard, cold heart? Kind of the way we described Mr. Sir at the beginning of the book. Does Stanley have sympathy for Zero here? No, with the hardened heart, you don't have sympathy for anybody. You're kind of like, sorry, it's not my problem. And Stanley says here, not only has digging the holes made his body tougher, he's become stronger. It's made his hands tougher. He doesn't get calluses. They're not as soft and fleshy as they were at the beginning. But he also doesn't feel as much sympathy for others as he used to. Is that a good thing or a bad thing if you stop feeling sympathy towards others? I don't know. If you're not willing to help others, is that a good thing? You tell me. Bonus points. Here's your bonus points. Let me know what you think. Is having a hard heart better because you don't let people in, so maybe you're not going to get hurt? Or is it worse because you're not willing to help others? Let me know what you think. It's just an opinion. Stanley finished his letter. He barely had enough moisture in his mouth to seal and stamp the envelope. It seemed that no matter how much water he drank, he was always thirsty. Remember when Mr. Sir asked him when he first got there if he was thirsty? And Stanley was like, yes. And Mr. Sir said, well, you better get used to it. You're going to be thirsty for the next 18 months. Remember? Well, Stanley is admitting he's always thirsty. And that's how chapter 18 ends. So they haven't found anything additional other than that gold tube. But we have learned a little bit more about Stanley and how camp is changing him. And we've learned a little bit more about X-Ray and the way others treat him and the way others think of him. I kind of just want to give Zero rather. I kind of just want to give Zero a hug. I guess in COVID times we can't really hug, but I still want to give him a hug. What do you think? All right, guys, this is all for today. The next video will be chapter 19, and it will be posted next week.